part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Thank you for downloading the Chase Smith Podcast, proudly part of the Press Play Podcast Network. In this episode, I interview Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith. We wrap up the 2021 Browns NFL season, talk about the AFC North, and briefly give our predictions for the NFL playoffs. Let's get it! Here with me, he's a member of the Football Writers Association of America. He's the editor of SI Browns Digest, one of the Sports Illustrated. Pete Smith. Pete, thanks for coming on the podcast, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yo, the last time we talked on a pod was 2018, Pete. At the time, you were writing for Spin Zone, analyzing the draft and the combine and the Senior Bowl. I was hosting the Orange is Orange with Jeremy, and insert Paul Rudd gif. Now look at us. Pete, now look at us. I don't know what I have to say for myself, but man, you Sports Illustrated, man. I mean, did you always been a dream to cover the Browns for Sports Illustrated?
No. Like, I don't know. I think it's probably not all that different from you. You sort of like push into like different things you're interested in. And you just sort of like, I didn't really have like a set goal. So like my whole thing when I started writing and I started coaching was like, I was hoping one of them would get to a point where I could pay my bills. And, I didn't know how long that was going to be like a thing I could do, but fortunately, it took a while, but fortunately I was lucky enough to find myself in this situation. But I never like had this aspiration where I said, I want to write for Sports Illustrated, or I want to, I wanted a column covering the Cleveland Browns. It was like, I got to in college and stuff. And like, when I originally went to college, I sort of had this like idea of what I thought I was going to be. And I got there and I didn't really like what I thought I was, I had this, this vision of what you thought you were supposed to do, not necessarily what you wanted to do. So I was one of those people who like didn't really have an idea of what I wanted to do and just sort of wandered into a thing that I like doing, which happened to be this. And, I'm sure there's some element of sweat equity, that just hard work and stuff, but like, there's no undoubtedly amount of luck. But like I said, I don't know if it's similar to you, but like you sort of decided you were sort of doing this thing and you just sort of pushed on it long enough and it just led to where you ended up, not necessarily, a set endpoint where you're like, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to do it.
Yeah, it is definitely a grind, right? You just labor of love, keep working at something that you care about. And when doors open, you kind of take those opportunities and do the best you can. Pete, not surprised by your success. Always have done great work, man. And I don't know, I haven't listened to the 2018 episode of the Orange is Orange in forever, but I have the show notes in front of me. And what we were talking about the 2018 NFL draft with quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, and Lamar Jackson. And I have a question. I don't have how we answered, but this is a question I asked. How many franchise quarterbacks are in this draft? That was a question that we talked about, and pretty fascinating case study of that draft, Pete.
Yeah. And one of the guys I said was not going to was Josh Allen.
He was my fifth ranked as well.
Yeah. Like, and this has been like a topic that has come up this week is like people talk about, well, if he came to Cleveland, he'd be this great quarterback. And I don't think people understand how miraculous his transformation has been, which is all the credit in the world to him. But it's also, some of these things aren't just luck. They are in the same way that Lamar Jackson with the Ravens is a great situation. Mm-hmm. Josh Allen going to the Bills has been a great situation. Patrick Mahomes going to the Chiefs was a great situation. All three of those were organizations that were pretty good when they got them. The Bills and the Ravens, the year they got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, they were both 9-7.
Yeah.
And the Bills traded up to go get Josh Allen. The Ravens got Lamar Jackson in the first round. And the previous year, the Chiefs traded up to get Patrick Mahomes. They were all organizations that were set to succeed and have a quarterback succeed. So and that part of it, you're looking at it going, well, of course they were successful, but at the same time, like Josh Allen struggled for 2 years before it like broke through, and now he's one of the most dominant quarterbacks in the league. I think had that been in Cleveland, where we know ahead of with hindsight, we know Hugh Jackson was fired before Halloween.
He was supposed to be this quarterback guru, quarterback whisperer. That's what he was touted as when he was brought in.
And now we're on Baker Mayfield's fourth head coach. It's not easy to be like, yeah, of course Josh Allen would have succeeded through that, or Lamar Jackson, whatever. I think it's difficult for anyone to succeed in that environment, which in some ways is like a weird way to sort of look at Baker Mayfield. And one of the reasons I liked him for the Browns was because he was sort of idiot proof in the sense that he was developed enough and advanced enough that like he could get through what we knew was going to be a disastrous head coach in Hugh Jackson initially. I mean, you remember, you go back to that season, Baker Mayfield didn't take a first team rep in the entire training camp or preseason. It was Tyrod Taylor's team. It was Tyrod Taylor's preparation. That was Hugh's guy. And then he suffers the concussion, and Baker Mayfield goes in, and like he went into that Jets game and won. Like that's why he had such great chemistry with Rashard Higgins, because those guys were practicing together for months. Like, he came in and it worked really well with guys like Jarvis Landry and stuff, but it wasn't because those guys were practicing together. They specifically tried to avoid it. So
there's going to be like a 30 for 30 of how unlucky Tyrod Taylor's career is. There's got to be. The man just like is, I feel like, a very good quarterback that just is, whether it's a team's doctor who messes up or just an unfortunate end game. I think the Texans would have had a better year if he would have stayed healthy. But Pete, as you were talking about, Mahomes and the Chiefs, Lamar and the Ravens, Josh Allen and the Bills, one of the things that sticks out to me is how those franchises have molded and shaped their offense and their team around those quarterbacks. And when you look at what Cleveland has done with Baker, I can't say that, and maybe they've tried with the play action, the rollouts, and it was just, it's hard to see how this offense fits, and they've sold completely out on what he can do, how he was not under center a lot in college. And now it just, I feel like there's a huge paradigm shift that those franchises said, hey, we have these quarterbacks, we're going to change our entire offensive scheme to fit their skill set. And I don't see that in Cleveland right now. And that it's concerning to me because I like Baker.
Here's the thing, like we get into talking in systems and offenses and stuff. And I look at like a guy like Kevin Stefanski, and I think his offense is versatile enough. It can cater to whatever. Like there's criticisms to like, he can't scheme open wide receivers, like premium wide receivers don't like him, or, he doesn't do a great job with those guys. And if you look at what he's done, and Stephon Diggs in 2019 is like the ultimate example, where Stephon Diggs was reportedly unhappy with the direction of the offense. How much of that was Stefanski and how much of that was the Vikings, I don't know. But you look at that, he had like 94 targets or something like that year, but he had like 1,100 yards, like super efficient. He was catching 12 yards per target, which is just absurd. But Stephon Diggs reportedly wasn't happy. Now this year he got like 160 targets. He caught 94 balls or whatever it was, and he got like 1,200 yards. Like, he may be happier because he's more involved. And, you hear about like, if you watch the Manning cast to the playoff game with Odell Beckham and stuff like that, which is obviously its own sort of thing. You talk about how, you got to get those guys involved early. That may be what Stefanski sort of doesn't do. He's a guy who looks at football and says, if I'm going to give 10 targets to receivers, however you want to get them, and I can get 150 yards, or I can get 10 targets to one guy and get 100 yards, he's going to take the 150 yards. That's just how he looks at the game. Yeah. Whereas so many of these offenses, like when Stefanski's offense doesn't work, the immediate reaction, especially when we had Beckham, was why didn't he get these targets? And when you look at this offense in general, that's the easiest thing to point to, because you look at the game and when it doesn't work, you're going, how the hell did player X get 7 targets and your alleged star got 4 or whatever it was? And I'd be very curious to ask him about this, but he has this sort of Bruce Lee mentality with offense where he's like this flow like water guy. If the defense is going to take away one thing, he's going to flow into whatever they're leaving open, which is unorthodox and unconventional. But in 2020, when it was really successful, you're sitting there going, I don't know why the hell Rashard Higgins is doing as well as he is, but it's really good. Or whoever it was, like random guy would suddenly have a great game just because that's what the defense was doing. When it doesn't work, you're sitting there going, why the hell did this guy get this much run? So related to Baker Mayfield, under center doesn't bother me. And I don't think any of that stuff does. I think more of the issue has been, we've sort of been lying to ourselves about what they've had around him at wide receiver for 2 years. And some of that is, obviously I'm famous for not liking Jarvis Landry, and it's the fit in which he's in this offense. To me, I always looked at it and go, you have this offensive tight ends, and obviously these guys didn't bring in Jarvis Landry. He's sort of a holdover from the John Dorsey era. He runs the same depth of target as tight ends do. So it's sort of redundant. Like, what is he adding in that situation that is unfair to the rest of the offense? It's also unfair to him. Now he's sort of like not special. Whereas like when he is within an offense where there's other guys running down the field or creating space for him, now he catches balls underneath and he can run and create offense. To me, the biggest issue the Browns have had these past 2 years has been creating space. Unhappy as he was, Odell Beckham made a big difference in spacing for this offense. And even though he wasn't getting the ball, he was making it really difficult for opponents to sort of key on things.
Yeah, and that was evident in the Chargers game at the beginning of the season this year against the Browns. He would, the defense would shade towards him. They would double. It was just, yes, you're right.
And like, again, going to the Rams, and people can argue about his effectiveness, whatever. Van Jefferson's the guy who's getting like all kinds of spacing by virtue of Beckham. Like, Beckham has not been great for Beckham this year, regardless of which team he's on. I know the touchdowns are great and certainly the point of the game, but just an efficiency standpoint, he hasn't been that great. But he's been great for everybody else. That has to be extremely frustrating for him, because Odell Beckham has a lot of pride and thinks of himself as a superstar, but it's great for everybody else. So that's part of the reason I think the Browns were so hesitant to be like letting him go or trading him, which ultimately led to what it, the way he wanted to get out. So as far as Baker Mayfield's concerned, if they can improve the spacing in the offense, I think that's going to make his life a whole lot easier, make him a whole lot more effective. They need to get dudes. And I think Donovan Peoples-Jones has the capability to be that. I think he's scratching the surface of what he can be. I think his efficiency points to a guy that, despite Baker's obvious struggles this year, the fact he did as well as he did, averaging over 10 yards per target, is an indication of how good he's going to be. Whereas so many of these other guys, the high-priced guys, the guys that sort of we all point to and go, I don't know, whether it's Landry, it's Austin Hooper, it was Odell Beckham, they're like 6, which is a really bad number. Nick Chubb averaged 7 yards per target. That's not where you want to be. Like, you want to be in that 9 to 10 yard average or better. And I think if they get, we can debate who fits relative to what we could possibly get, but I think that is ultimately what's missing. I think between that and when he gets healthy, that is going to sort of showcase what that is. And now, it feels 2 years like too late in some ways, but I think given what has happened with where Odell Beckham went, with where Jarvis Landry's probably going to go, and where Rashard Higgins sort of turned into a pumpkin this year, the Browns are by necessity going to have to overhaul that room.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to give them an opportunity to sort of really not whether or not Baker Mayfield succeeds. I think obviously it's sink or swim for him next year, one way or the other. It's going to decide itself, but they're going to get weapons. If he doesn't work, it sets them up for whoever the next guy will be. But I think it's ultimately also going to be with him in mind. because let's be honest, people want to deny this all they want. Kevin Stefanski on a weekly basis tells you, I believe in this kid. He can do it. Andrew Berry flatly tells you, I believe in this kid. He can do it. And we're sort of going, well, I don't know if they really think he can do it. And, listen to him. The one thing these guys have been throughout the 2 years they've been here is they've been straightforward. Sometimes what they say is convoluted, but ultimately they're pretty honest about what they think.
Yeah, I agree. I've gone on record. I think Baker will be our week 1 starter. To kind of bring this full circle, I would just like to see Baker out of the gun more. I think his height, contributed some of the batted balls a little bit this year. And I just get a little envious when I see other franchises go all out, all they can, put all the chips in the middle to maximize the skill set of their quarterback. I know they didn't draft Baker. I know Baker isn't Barry or Stefanski's quarterback, but I think he has the tools needed to be successful in Cleveland. Pete, as you were talking about Stefanski being like a little Bruce Lee with flow as water, I just couldn't help but think some of the maybe the reported but unsourced reports that there was some conflict or whatever. Baker would just been like that Cliff Booth character from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and they would reenact that like Bruce Lee, Brad Pitt scene where there's like, I don't know if you've seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I haven't, but I know what it is, but no.
Okay. Well, we'll just fast forward this part then. Well, hey, I think one way to maybe help us talk about the Browns season, Pete, is to do a little segment called the biggest Browns season. And how this is going to work is I'm going to offer the biggest blank of the Browns season, and we're just going to talk about it a little bit. I think that might be a way to help kind of shape some of these conversations, because there is a lot to talk about the Browns season. There's always a lot to talk about the Browns season, but I think that this will be a fun way to do it. I got a couple here. The first one here, the biggest disappointment for this Browns season was what?
Injuries. I mean, there's no getting away from it, whether it's Baker Mayfield, the other guys I would point to, Jedrick Wills, his ankle shaped the season. The injuries on the offensive line shaped the season. Jarvis Landry's knee week 2, the same week Baker hurt his shoulder, shaped the season. Like those things, I think week 2, as soon as he grabbed his shoulder, we denied it for a long time, but the reality was the season was sort of not necessarily over, but it changed how far we could go.
Yep. I think, yes, obviously injuries was a huge factor in the season, but I think the way that we weren't able to close out games and come away, there was a lot of close games. I think we won the Detroit game, which ended up being a little closer than people thought, but there were a lot of games, like the Raiders game, the Chiefs game, the Chargers game. There's a lot of these games that last year that we did kind of win and come on the other side of. This year, we just couldn't get any of those to fall our way, whether it was one more stop, one more first down. And I think that leads to the ultimate biggest disappointment, which we didn't make the playoffs. And that sounds like a really, really easy answer. But when you have a division that was really kind of there for the taking, the Bengals ended up going out and taking it. And we had opportunities, we had games to win, and we couldn't finish it out for whatever reason, whether it's play calling or quarterback play or whatever it was, a defense that couldn't come up with whatever we need, whatever it was. Those kind of close games that we ended up dropping ended up costing us the playoffs. And so injuries, yes, you can't argue that. I also think if we're just being really kind of like generic here, it just sucks that we weren't playing last weekend. And could have probably given a couple of games a little more competition than what we saw. Pete, the biggest surprise for you this season, what do you got?
I would say the depth on defense, really, the amount of COVID issues this team ran into and injuries on that side of the ball. And, for all the disappointment of not making the playoffs, for all you talk about not being able to close out games, which are 100% true. The defense stepped up in ways that I didn't expect it to. Guys like MJ Stewart, guys like Greedy Williams, who people sort of had written off. A lot of these guys stepped in big moments. I mean, the combination of like Joe Jackson and, Ifedi Adenabo and Porter Gustin came in and, guys that people don't really know or were on the practice squad or whatever, Sheldon Day, particularly in those games against the Raiders and the Packers, which you go back to those 2 weeks and we got just the sheer amount of COVID players out for COVID. It was like, they're not going to play in this. They're not going to compete in this game. And then they go out and surprise and hang in there. And you could like one of the most sort of organic conversions I've ever seen was the amount of disbelief going into that to the crowd being won over to a point where you haven't had that sort of crowd experience in years, where that was sort of like reminiscent of what Cleveland used to be known for in terms of the dog pound and all that stuff, where that the crowd in that game lifted that defense and caused problems for the Raiders, including 2 timeouts that almost proved critical in that game. You follow that up with the Packers game, where after that Raiders game and the heartbreaking loss that they had, the reaction was, why are we even talking about the Packers? There's no way. And then a week later, we're sitting there pissed off because of the way they lost the Packers game, because they should have, been in a position to win it. So the depth of the defense was amazing. And I think a couple of those guys, MJ Stewart, most notably to me, is going to end up getting a contract with this team to be a bigger part of the defense. And like, those are the shining sort of stories that you're really excited about.
I think, didn't he just make a post that he's like Cleveland might be done?
I think he just, this is increasingly a thing that players just do, is like, sort of like, the season's over. Thank you for everything. I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones did the same thing and he's under contract. Like,
that's a good point.
There's a lot of players across the league that are just sort of doing this, if for no other reason. It's not the worst thing in the world to sort of get fans to be like, we've got to sign this guy, that little bit of added incentive.
He definitely showed out the last couple weeks of the season, stepped up huge. I agree. I think depth was the biggest surprise. I want to throw a couple other names your way, Pete. I think for sure Greedy was written off essentially, and then ended up having a huge year. I think Greg Newsome, like the level of eliteness that he showed, I think was a surprise as well. I think maybe have a little PTSD with some of those other high backfield draft picks we've had, and to see him just be a complete stud along with Greedy, what was such a delight. I wasn't surprised by this player's emergence, but I think nationally, Dearness Johnson got some recognition. I loved how he ran last year. I thought he ran really hard when he came in for, I think it was Hunt in the Cowboys game last year, or maybe it's Chubb. It was Chubb. I don't remember. One of them got injured.
Yeah,
anyway,
it was Chubb hurt his knee that game. That's right. When he twisted his knee and came out. And Dearness Johnson came in and ran for like 40 yards or something like that, including a big one to break open, which was key in that game. Yeah.
And so just, I think nationally surprised, people were like, oh, the Browns have maybe one of the best running back rooms in the league with what they got going on there. So I agree. I think depth was a great surprise with those strong areas. I think there was also some realizations that, oh, we don't have depth here in areas that we might realize we need it. Pete, the biggest win, and I'm not talking about like the biggest like game schedule victory. I'm talking about the biggest like the biggest win that the team can say, hey, that was awesome.
I mean, to me, it's the defense. To me, it is where this defense went from last year, which was in 2020, where Joe Woods was given Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, Sheldon Richardson, and largely a bunch of spare parts, and said, make a defense, like hang in there for a year and we'll make it worth your while. And ultimately that defense was hung in there long enough to get the playoff win and do better against the Chiefs than they should have. But then they reward him by giving him Jadeveon Clowney, by giving him John Johnson III, even though John Johnson III didn't have a great year, by giving him Greg Newsome, who was great, by giving him JOK and giving him all these players, Tack McKinley, even though his season ended in a disappointing fashion with the injury, and he paid them off. Like, the defense was what he was hoping it would be, save for defensive tackle, which is the big issue going into the offseason. Obviously, there's an extenuating circumstance with that, which is unfortunate. Yeah. But that side of the ball, going into this year, we were thinking, oh, the offense is going to be great. It's just a matter of, can the defense be good enough by the time we get to the playoffs? By the time we've won the division, we're talking about if we're going to get the bye week in the first round of the playoffs, would the defense would be there to get us to a Super Bowl? And instead, we got halfway through the season, and it was like, the defense is keeping us in this thing. Can the offense do anything? Can they do enough to win the game?
Please score. Please
yes,
score.
Like
points.
It was just like, including that Ravens game they won, where they needed Myles Garrett to score one of their touchdowns. Like that turnaround, that improvement, sort of it vindicated everything about what Joe Woods was going. I mean, he was a guy that people were trying to fire for a large part of the season.
Yeah. Brown's Twitter is a whole other conversation, Pete. We're not going to talk about that now. That's a whole other biggest blank. I'm not going to fill it.
Well, I mean, even players were asked about it, by media members. I mean, one of the first questions. That's another conversation. Myles Garrett was asked about, is Joe Woods a problem? And he was one of these guys is like, that was one of the first moments where you got the sense that like Myles was understanding what he is, where he's saying, no, we win or lose as a team. But yeah, I mean, that's how far we've come, that we were talking about firing this guy, however nonsensical that was, to they carried the end of this year.
Yep. I agree. I think the defense, I'm going to say my win there is Clowney's sustainability, able to play all season, and the way that he was able to produce and kind of provide that extra pressure on the other side of the D line, and JOK together. I think trading up for JOK, he had a lot of hype, and he is pretty much as advertised. But I think a lot of wins we saw on that Browns defense. I really hope Clowney comes back. I would like to see him here. I think he fit well. I think he seems to enjoy kind of a little bit of the camaraderie and brotherhood that they've developed in that defense, maybe a little more than what we've seen on offense. So I'm going to agree with you there, but lean into the Clowney would be the biggest win in my opinion, and JOK. All right, Pete, two more here. Biggest takeaway of the Browns season 2021.
Biggest takeaway, that as disappointing as it was, they're still not far away, that they can, the idea is they were this lost year. And I think for the most part, they can be a contender really quickly. And a lot of that comes down to the luck of injuries, but they don't need to do that much to be a very good football team. It feels like they are further away because of how frustrating and disappointing it was. But I think in part because of the things we've talked about and where they've improved, but just watching the playoffs, like, the idea is like, you're a Browns fan, you watch this team every Sunday and you're thinking, oh my God, this is the only team this happens to. Then you watch the playoffs and you're like, oh my God, this is every team in the league. They're all terrible. And it's just a matter of coming out on top. So to me, that's the biggest thing. As this should have been a year where the Browns were contending for the Super Bowl. There's no getting away from that. That is irritating. That is frustrating. That is disappointing. That, you call it whatever you want. If you insist on like beating people over the head saying this is a failure and you need to feel bad about it, that's fine. But they're also not that far away from being able to contend again and being one of the best teams in the league next year.
Yeah. One of my biggest takeaways, Pete, was outside noise. It seemed to some degree that a lot of the outside noise made its way into, and you touched on it with Joe Woods, made its way into the Browns locker room for whatever reason. What discourse fans and the public conversation, it seemed to somehow, some way make its way into the Browns locker room, whether that was through significant others, whether that was through whatever vehicles or whatever was going on. It did seem that outside noise played a part in the chemistry of the team and the relation between the team and the fans and the relation between the players and the media. It did seem that the outside noise was a factor in this year's team. And I think that, well, before, I mean, would you agree with that statement, Pete?
I think there's definitely validity to what you're saying. So much of this, I think, is a product of of what is going on. And by that, I mean the pandemic and just
That's a good point.
the combination of sort of, there's no way of dressing this up. It is a trauma that has been visited on everyone. Like everyone is dealing with it.
And I take that serious. It's not a cliche to say, oh, pandemic this. No, this is a global historical moment that 100 years from now, we're going to look like they're going to read about this time of our existence. So I do take this seriously. It isn't cliche to say, well, hey, like this is, everyone's going through something. And so there is validity to what you're saying. That's a good point.
So when you look at it through that context and you have fans who are going to a game and they're going through what they're going through in terms of it's tough, like whether it's job, whether it's family, whether it's, people they know are sick or whatever it is, and they don't have an outlet productively. I mean, our mental health as a world right now is not in great shape. And there's this, whether you're in the stadium or you're at home or wherever, sports has become a very easy outlet to be pissed off or be disappointed or be enraged. And this is not a Cleveland thing. This is one of these things where people ask me all the time is like, is this the only place this is like this? And if you look around, like this is every team in the league is dealing with this in some form or fashion where people are pissed at their team that they're not doing what they thought they were supposed to do. Or there are players who are saying this treatment or being booed or whatever it is bothers me and I don't like it. And obviously this came to a little bit of a head with Jedrick Wills. And I think
a little bit,
I think the way he worded it in terms of, well,
that was rough.
Stupid. Let's put it this way. Stupid because it's not like it was spur of the moment. He pasted something that had previously like been there and was wrong the first time. Putting in an economic argument was silly, but there is something to be said where you're going, in his case, he's 21 or 22 at this point and saying, look, we get it, but it's not helping. And it does do something in the same way that, him firing back and saying, whether I think it was grocery store people, baggers or whatever.
Yeah. Grocery store.
In the same way that him saying that is every bit as valid for those people to go like, dude, we're part of the reason you're in this position.
You didn't double bag that. What's wrong with you? Boo.
Yeah. Like, so, I mean,
you didn't put the meats together. Come on.
Like I get both sides of this. And I actually think the Browns, as a team, were probably better at this than I think they get credit for in terms of being able to sustain, like staying together and being a team. But that doesn't change the fact that, as you mentioned, in terms of spouses and some of the other things, and by the way, I don't have any problem with, I'm not going to tell them what to do with their social media any more than they're going to tell me what to do with mine. Like they're allowed to think and say, like this idea that they shouldn't be able to have this. They're people, whatever. But that does have an impact. Like you're going home to this. You're and if your spouse,
look, everything is heightened right now.
Yeah, exactly. That's the exact word. That's the exact way I'd phrase it. That's exactly
everything is heightened. And when people in this heightened state get a whiff or a sense or experience something that's normal, sports is an escape for people that's not a profession for them. It's a reminder of normalcy. And for those 4 hours or for whatever they're doing there, it's just, oh my gosh, it's me and football or me and basketball. And I think you were able to kind of word that in a very, 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 very well, very, very good way. It does seem though, and that be my takeaway, is just like some outside noise, unfortunately, did seem to make its way in. And I'm hoping that as we go into the off season, the Browns had a really quiet offseason last year, which was really encouraging. And then just kind of like snowballed into this cluster. What happened this year? I would push back and say, I don't think the team responded really well to it. I do think it kind of, especially with OBJ's dad, there was something, I don't know. I'm not in the locker room. Tyvis Powell and the Orangers said that it doesn't affect the team a lot. And so I might just be reading way too much into it, but from my perspective, it did seem to have some type of effect. One more, Pete, and then we're going to take a break. The biggest hole going into the offseason. What would you say the biggest hole on this Browns roster going into the offseason? You brought the defensive tackle up just a few moments ago.
Yeah, it's especially given what just happened, it's really hard to say anything else. I mean, there's two that jump out, and it's really a question of which one you think is the bigger problem: wide receiver, defensive tackle. Right now, I'd say defensive tackle. They have two guys that will be back with Jordan Elliott and Tommy Togiai. Neither one of those guys you can pencil in and say these guys are starting, and that's where they're at right now. They don't have any starting defensive tackles.
And what Pete's referring to is Malik McDowell was arrested in Florida for decent exposure and assaulting a police officer. And so for already a weak position is, going to be addressed definitely in one or two areas, draft or the free agency. You can't not say that's a big hole. But I would say because of the strength of the defense, do you think what round one, Pete, did they go receiver or defensive tackle, or are they able to kind of go with whatever the flow of the draft is with those two positions?
Well, they're going to address needs in free agency. That's just how most teams operate anyway, but certainly how the Browns operate. They're not going to wait until April and go, fingers crossed, let's hope this works out, but just looking at the strength of the draft, defensive tackle, it's not there. And right now, I think the odds on favorite is wide receiver. The only other option that really makes sense looking at it from here is pass rusher. And that's not because Jadeveon Clowney won't be here. I'm at 95% he will be. It's just one, they don't know how long it could be 2 years, it could be whatever, but he also does tend to get hurt, and they have no depth. And their guy who had the Browns had Myles Garrett had 16 sacks. Jadeveon Clowney ended up with 9. The next guy was Malik McDowell with 3. And the guy after him was Troy Hill. So in terms of generating pressure, it's just an area where I think it's going to be a big focus for them, and the draft is rich at that spot. So that's why I think it's going to be wide receiver or pass rusher.
Cool. Pete, let's take a quick break. Stick around. We're going to talk about the AFC North a little bit and touch on the NFL playoffs. We'll be right back.
Hello, Brooks here with the Books with Brooks monthly book club podcast. Here's how Books with Brooks works. We read one book a month, and then we talk about it. Classics like Stephen King's The Shining, debut novels like We Are the Brennans by Tracy Lang, and tons of other compelling, life-changing stories, one book and 1 month at a time. So come read along with us and then listen in.
Hey everyone, it's JD from the Hyman Podcast. Backed by popular demand, I'm excited to let you know that new episodes of the Hyman Podcast will drop every other Monday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're going to continue the conversations we started last season and keep having those hard conversations. There is so much in store for you this season, and I'm excited to share it with you. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single moment. The Hyman Podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
All right, we are back with Pete Smith, editor of SI Browns Digest, for the Sports Illustrated. Pete, I want to touch on real quick the AFC North and NFL playoffs. I had Dave Damashek on a couple weeks ago, and is the AFC North really going to run through Kentucky for the next 5, 6, 7, 10 years? Is it really going to go through the Bengals in Cincinnati?
No, and it's not because they're not good. They're really well set up. Joe Burrow is playing at an unbelievably high level. They've got tremendous weapons around him, but the rest of that team is flawed. I mean, that's why most people didn't think they were going to be as good as they were. The Ravens are really so well set up. To me, I actually came into this thinking this was going to be somewhat of a rebuilding year for them, or I should say reloading. I thought they were going to be competitive. I thought the division was going to come down to the Browns and the Ravens, and the Browns were going to win it. because of the state, I thought they were going to sort of take a step back, losing their edge rushers in Yannick Ngakoue and the other dude who went to the Patriots. That might set them back a little bit. Reality is that they started out strong, but injuries just overcame them.
Yeah.
They ended up finishing dead last. The Browns obviously had their injury concerns amid other problems. So part of the reason that people think the Ravens are going to be or the Bengals are going to be so good is because they swept the Ravens and the Steelers, which is great, but the Browns beat the hell out of them. And they're set up really well to match up against this team for the foreseeable future because they've got a really well set up secondary and they've got a really good running game. The Bengals don't deal real well with either. So the Bengals are certainly in a great spot, but go back 12 months and we're sitting here going, the Browns are going to be the team that this division runs through because Baker Mayfield is playing top 10 quarterback level football. And Joe Burrow is sitting there recovering from a knee injury. Now, we're recording this on a Tuesday. Baker Mayfield's going into surgery on Wednesday for his shoulder. Like, that's how quickly things can change. But I don't think the Ravens are going anywhere. I think the Steelers are the ones that are going to have the hardest time. So to me, I think we're going to sort of maybe briefly, but revisit the 80s, which is Boomer Esiason, Bernie Kosar, and Warren Moon basically vying for that top spot. While, the Steelers are just sort of there with Bubby Brister. Like, we'll see. Maybe they find a quarterback. Maybe they find a quarterback quicker than that. But that's sort of where I think this thing's going. So I think every year it's going to be who gets that heartbreaking injury, who gets that tough beat, who gets that bad situation. I don't. The Bengals may obviously won it this year. They could win the Super Bowl. I don't think it's very likely, but they could do it. And then next year, maybe they win the division again. But I don't think it's as simple as going, well, it's going to be this way for 7 to 10 years, because we literally did this conversation last year.
We did.
And the Bengals weren't in the conversation
at all. You're right. And obviously a lot of recency bias just with the Bengals and how well Burrow's playing and Jamar Chase able to come in the league and do pretty incredible things. I think they're going to be capped by Zach Day. But it's hard to not look at the successful teams with that kind of like caliber quarterback and how the league does favor offenses and not be a little discouraged and worried that, gosh, dang it. Like, here the Bengals are, and they have found what seems to be right now what you need to have long-term success. And that is a stud quarterback and an offense that can move the ball. It does seem also that the Browns have orchestrated and built a defense to kind of directly combat that. I don't think Joe Burrow's ever beat Cleveland.
He has not. No,
which is
he's on 0-3 because he didn't play that final game. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, they're great. Yeah. He is a great quarterback, but it's this is part of the reason I like Joe Woods is because he understands what the league is doing and he understands how to combat it. We'll see how successfully it is, but they crushed against the division this year. But like I said, it's even if you don't think the Browns are going to be back, and I do, the Ravens are just have to be healthy, and they've got a great set of corners. They've got all kinds of things to compete against that team. So I mean, it's tough. Like, you have a quarterback in Joe Burrow who's great. He looks like he could take over the league for a while. So by virtue of that, you're in a great spot. But the AFC North to me is competitive enough that it's going to be a slugfest every year.
Yes, I hope that's what happens. I think that is definitely possible, where there's like this kind of like 3-team battle for the top. Probably have 1 or 2 playoff teams every year would be my guess. I think I like 2 from the North more than the West, more than the South, maybe 2 from the East. But yeah, I go ahead.
Here's what I would say. I would just suggest is, like, people have anointed Justin Herbert as an outstanding quarterback, and he earned it. He didn't make the playoffs. They were 9-8, and he was unbelievable. He threw for 5,000 yards and did all that. So I mean, like, they had Derwin James was healthy, Joey Bosa was healthy. Like, in terms of like breaks of health and everything, like, things went the Chargers' way, and they're 9-8 and at home.
Yeah.
Like that's where
point.
I sort of look at it and go, don't just immediately assume that you can pencil in the Bengals at the top of the division. It's really hard. And in his case, he's got to deal with the Chiefs, and the Broncos are like a quarterback away, like that great team. So like, this
hear
is not
that,
the
Bengals
AFC.
fans, chill out. You guys aren't going to be good forever. Next year, going down.
The other part of that is like, and I like Joe Burrow, but he takes the most sacks in the league. Like
they got to figure out some
things. It obviously it cost him with a knee injury, and like even this past week there was like this one sack he took where his knee went sort of awkward, and you're like sitting there going, "Oh my god!"
Was that the one you could see the camera angle right at like knee level too?
Yes.
Yeah, that was.
Like,
I was like,
there,
"Oh my gosh!" Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, like, yeah, it's hard. This is not the Patriots in the AFC East where there's 3 garbage teams, and you're sitting there going, who's going to compete? Like there's too many good teams.
Yep.
In this division.
All right. So what do you see happening here in the playoffs, Pete? Do you have picks for this weekend's games? We got Green Bay, San Francisco. We have Tennessee, Cincy. We have the Chiefs, and my mind is slipping me, and we have Tampa Bay and the Rams. Who do the Chiefs play? Who is that team? Oh,
they play the Bills.
The Bills. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Packers are going to end the modern day answer to Neil O'Donnell and the Jimmy Garoppolo led 49ers. They're a terrific team, but they are eerily similar to those Steelers teams where they were unbelievable, if not for, quarterback. I think the Chiefs are still going to, manage to beat the Bills. I think the Bills are really, really well set up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's going to be, that should be a great game. And hopefully it's everything we hope it would be, where those two guys are going down to the wire. I still think the Chiefs have enough sort of credibility that they're going to sort of eke it out. This is one of those leagues where it's tough and you sort of have to earn it. I think the Buccaneers are going to beat the Rams. The thing that concerns me is how good Cam Akers was, and I still don't know how that's medically possible, given how recently he tore his Achilles. But that defensive line and how little they give up the run, they can do enough to frustrate those receivers, and you still got to find a way to deal with Brady. I think Tennessee is going to beat the Bengals, and it comes down to the fact for me that the Titans can control the football. If Derrick Henry is back and he looks like Derrick Henry, the Bengals can't stop that. And
refreshed and kind of like fresh legs, Derrick. Well, that's injury notwithstanding, but
I just, the problem is and you saw this against the Raiders, is like the Bengals defense struggles. They're down guys. We'll see what happens. I mean, obviously they lost Larry Ogunjobi for the year, which sucks because I love Larry Ogunjobi. I don't know what the status of Trey Hendrickson is, but I assume he will play. But if they can't get them off the field, I don't know how many possessions Joe Burrow is going to have.
It almost feels like Tennessee and Cleveland are very similar in their makeup and what that looks like. You kind of look at, I know they have AJ Brown and Julio Jones, but
that's where you're.
That's a little different, but I just get a lot of same vibes. I love Tennessee, but I'm going to agree with you on Green Bay. I think they're going to beat the 49ers. I'm going to say Cincy wins in Tennessee. I don't know. They got Burrow's hot, and sometimes I think the bye week can go against some teams in the playoffs. And so just for kicks and giggles, I'm going to say Cincy over Tennessee. I have the Chiefs as well over the Bills, and I like the Rams over Tampa Bay. I think injury to Bear, I think, is going to be a little bigger deal than people think. And it's weird. I was talking to John Costco on Twitter. I think it's weird picking against Brady, but I don't think he likes pressure up the middle. And I think the Rams, Stafford, his first win, and Peyton and Eli talked about this in the broadcast, which the Manning cast was brilliant, by the way. I'm so glad you gave that a shout. Playing loose after you get that first win off your back. I just think, I really like what the Rams did I call them the St. Louis Rams? Did I say that out loud?
I'm not sure, but if you did, that's,
okay. Well, I'm sure
they at least we're there.
They will appreciate it, but so we'll see what happens. You have a Super Bowl pick, Pete?
Super Bowl pick. Right now, I feel like it's the Packers to lose. I think they are just, they're getting healthy at the right time in terms of getting like guys like Zadarius Smith back, getting Jair Alexander back, getting their left tackle back. And Aaron Rodgers is playing a super high level. They're really balanced, and they can sort of deal with whatever teams are sort of throwing at them. That's I think it's theirs to lose at this point. But we'll see. The either team, whether I think the Bills or whoever wins the Bills and the Chiefs is the heavy favorite.
Mm-hmm.
I think both of those teams can certainly win that game, but it's very difficult to bet against what the Green Bay Packers have built and just where they are in terms of their health. And they're a team that benefited from the, getting that bye week and what is crucially important and just such a huge advantage.
Yeah. So I'm going to say, here's my pick. I think the Rams are going to win the Super Bowl, but I think if the Bills beat the Chiefs, I think the Bills are going to win. And so I don't know if I'm able to do that. I think if the Chiefs win, the Rams are going to win the Super Bowl. I think if the Bills beat the Chiefs, the Bills are going to win the Super Bowl. But that's just me. Pete, this was just such a joy. Thank you so much for coming on. That does it for this episode of the Chase Smith Podcast. Thank you all so much for downloading and listening. Shouts to the Press Play Podcast Network for making this possible. Follow us online at Press Play Pods. Visit our website at pressplaypodcast.com. Keep up with all of our shows and network news. I'm also trying to get 75 iTunes reviews. So do me a solid, subscribe and leave me a kind review. That'd be incredibly generous of you, and I would very much appreciate it. Pete, what can you plug, my man?
You can find all my work at si.com/NFL/Browns. You can find me on Twitter at _Pete Smith _, and you can find like we all do my podcast with Nicole Chatham for Pete's sake. We'll have an episode coming out the same day this comes out. She was unable to do it this week, so I talked with Brent Sobleski, but Nicole's awesome. I love doing the show with her, so she's great. So yeah, that's where you can find me at.
Good. And don't we all have a Browns pod, Pete? Don't.
Yes.
We all right, man. Well, hey, very much appreciate your time, man. Have a great week, and we'll be in touch. Thanks.